This week's episode of Drifters was a fantasy-filled, blood-soaked, head-slicing orgy of awesomeness. The mystery of why all of these historical figures are being transported to a fantasy world might have been revealed in this episode. There's still a lot of questions, but this show certainly has a lot of style. Did I also mention that it's violent as shit? First off, before I talk about the second episode of Drifters, let me just talk about the actual opening, which was revealed in this week's episode. And not only is it just a really thrilling opening, being introduced to a lot of cool characters, but I thought it was really funny how a lot of the background characters in the opening actually sing along with the song. It shows that this series, despite the fact that it is incredibly violent, has a really great sense of humor. In fact, I think that's the best way to categorize Drifters, as an extreme dark comedy with a little bit of action on the side. I only say that because after watching scenes of Toyohisa fight against the Octoberist organization, cutting their limbs off, decapitating multiple people at once, it's always followed by those goofy anime moments. You know the ones I'm talking about, where the characters start to look super exaggerated, start getting big heads, and you get to see all of those tropes of comedy anime. That being said, this episode right here was pretty freaking awesome. The main story, of course, in this week's episode is we get to learn that in this fantasy world, there's this organization which is known as the Octoberist organization, which seems to have it out for demi-humans. Demi-humans are people who resemble humans but are slightly different. We're talking about elves, dwarves, and even hobbits. Yes, they actually mention hobbits in this episode. That means we might see some Lord of the Rings type shit in this show. I think it would be hilarious just to see them go to the Shire and fillet both Sam and Frodo's ass. This, of course, opens the door for a lot of crazy fantasy-filled epics, but the fact that it also involves historical figures is just insane, and honestly, a really nice twist as well. Apparently, what's really going on is that there's this war between these two different people. There's Murasaki and Easy. Murasaki is actually the character who was introduced in last week's episode, who's that one guy with the incredibly piercing eyes who's hanging out in that long white room with all of the doors. And what's really interesting is he's actually able to monitor everything that's going on in this fantasy world while he's reading his newspaper. It actually sort of constantly updates with all of the big events that are going on. And he's going to war with this one crazy-looking chick by the name of Easy, who also seems to operate in a very similar realm, which seems to be constantly encroaching on Murasaki's, where Murasaki's world is all white and pristine, hers is all dark and futuristic. I can't wait to learn why these two characters are going to war with each other, that and the fact that they seem to have their very own personal soldiers, with Murasaki using drifters and Easy using the Ends. I'm not sure what the Ends are, if they're actually beings from this fantasy world, or if they're actually drifters themselves, people from historical places. If the intro is any indication, we're gonna see a lot of crazy shit in this show. And this episode right here was just getting to demonstrate the raw and awesome power of Toyohisa. In this episode, the Octoberist organization is subjugating this elf village because why not? They're assholes, and they're evil, and they don't want any demi-humans around, and they're trying to make an example of them. They're trying to keep them locked up, and apparently the rules are these people are not allowed to go to the forest, and they're not allowed to get involved with the drifters. And of course, they do just this thing, so they decide to start thinning out their numbers a little bit and doing a little bit of ethnic cleansing by killing all of these elves. But luckily, you have Toyohisa, Nobunaga, and Yoichi who are making their way to the village, and Toyohisa is fast as shit. Really fast. For being a 30-year-old, he's pretty damn quick. They also confirm that Yoichi is 19 years old, which makes him incredibly young, and Nobunaga is pushing 50. Yet, they still have the skills to pay the kick-ass bills, especially Toyohisa, who in this episode just absolutely destroys everyone in his wake. Every single time he runs into a soldier, you know these guys are completely screwed, and he always manages to do it in a great style. I love the scene halfway through the episode when he's saving those two elf kids, where he's fighting against this guy, they meet swords, and he actually manages to cut right through his blade and decapitate this guy all at the same time. If you're squeamish in any way, turn your eyes away from this episode. There is just blood splatter all over the place, especially in the last half of the episode when Toyohisa arrives at this elf village and starts just destroying all of these soldiers and actually fighting against their commander who goes by the name of Aram. Aram is just a complete dick. He seems to really just enjoy being an asshole and subjugating the elf village and taking a lot of pleasure in torturing all of them. And what I do find most interesting, and something that I didn't even realize in the first episode until a friend actually pointed it out to me, is that all of the denizens of this fantasy world are actually speaking their very own language. It's not just straight Japanese, and that leads to a lot of confusion with all of these characters because they straight up just can't understand each other. The drifters cannot communicate with the people from the fantasy world. And this plot point ends up coming to a head at the end of this episode as Toyohisa is going to battle against this guy, and they're able to communicate with their swords, and predictably, of course, Toyohisa just makes a fool out of him. Not only does he just trick him by throwing his sword at him, but he puts him in this ridiculous headlock, and then pulls out another one of his swords, still keeping it in the sheath, and just continuously pounds this guy in the face, completely crushing him, making his teeth go all over the place. He then gives these weapons to all of the people from the elves' village, and allows them to finish the job, when they just come in like a group of freaking zombies, and just kill this guy by stabbing him repeatedly. It is brutal as hell. And so was this week's episode of Drifters. So what's the rundown on this episode of Drifters? This episode had my attention a lot more than the first. The only reason is just because they decided to get right into the ridiculous action. I love the style of this show. It's got some pretty damn great animation cues, and all of the action sequences are incredibly gory and over the top, but damned if they don't look good. The biggest takeaway from this episode of Drifters is that we're finally starting to learn a little bit more about, like, what actually is going on. This battle between Murasaki and Easy, and the fact that they're sort of using these soldiers from history to go to war with each other. We don't know the reasoning behind it yet, but I'm really interested to see what the deal is. We could very well be seeing the battle between God and Satan themselves. That's at least my theory, anyway. All I know is, it's a really interesting premise, and it really proved itself in this episode. We also have this other faction, which is the Octoberist organization, which are these normal humans who are subjugating all of the demi-humans of this world, as well as going to war with the Drifters. So we have a number of different factions existing in this ridiculous series, and I can't wait to see how people are going to team up, who they're going to be fighting against. It's going to be really interesting to see as the series goes along. That and the fact that the character design is just awesome. It is so distinctly Hellsing, though. I mean, this is from the creator of Hellsing, and you can see that all over the character expressions and just the way the actual characters look, especially the main character of Toyohisa. But there's also this other small character who was introduced in the episode. I think she actually appeared at the end of last week's episode. Her name is Semu, and she's kind of like this reconnaissance officer for the Octoberist organization, and she totally just looks like a Hellsing character. She's really bumbling and ridiculous, but I can't wait to learn about her and the actual organization that she works for. It looks like they're actually about to be attacked by Easy's Ends at the very end of this week's episode, who, of course, are all kept in shadow because we don't need to know who these guys are quite yet. But it's got me really excited to see who they are, and I cannot wait to see the mystery behind all of them. Really, though, this episode was just an excuse for hardcore violence and really cool kick-ass action, and if that's something that you're looking for from your anime, this series gives it up in spades. This is a super stylistic, fantasy, sci-fi series, whatever you want to call it. All I know is it was awesome, and I cannot wait to see more of it. I'm going to give this episode right here a 5 out of 5. I just really enjoyed this one so much, and there's still so many more questions despite the fact that we got some answers, but I can't wait to see what they're going to do with this season of Drifters. It's based on a manga series, so of course my biggest fear is that it's not going to actually adapt the manga. It's just going to try and come up with its own ending. I haven't looked at the manga version of Drifters quite yet. I just want to experience it in anime form first before I decide to start reading some black and white pages. What I will say is, if you want to trade in the black and white for lots of red, check out the anime Drifters. If any of you watched this week's episode of Drifters, make sure to tell me what you thought about it in the comment section below. What did you think about this episode right here? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What are your theories on Murasaki and Easy? Why are they actually warring with each other? And who do you think the ends are going to be? Are they going to be other characters taken historically from a lot of different places in time? What historical figures do you want to see go to war in Drifters? Please tell me in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe, leave me a comment or two, and make sure to like the video. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, stay dandy, baby.